In a few moments, I will sign an executive order to begin eliminating the Federal Department of Education once and for all. We're going to be returning education very simply back to the states where it belongs, and this is a very popular thing to do, but much more importantly, it's a common sense thing to do. I said to Linda, Linda, I'm making you the Secretary of Education, but if you do a great job, you will put yourself out of a job.
Almost 1 year to the day, President Trump promised to dismantle the Department of Education. And despite Congress actually giving it more money than Trump asked for in the last funding round, he has made some steps towards that goal. On Thursday, the Department of Education and the Treasury Department announced their historic federal Student Assistance Partnership Plan. The Education Secretary, Linda McMahon, says that this is one step closer to breaking up the federal education bureaucracy.
The student loan portfolio currently sits at nearly $1.7 trillion. The Department of Education was never intended to serve as one of our nation's largest banks. Now is the time for a hard reset. That's why the Department of Education and Department of the Treasury today announced a historic partnership to better align federal student aid programs with those they are intended to serve.
Yep. The Trump administration also announced today that they're expanding their efforts to dismantle the Education Department further by moving its oversight of school safety grants and foreign funding for universities over to other agencies like HHS and the State Department. Took a year, but it's happening. Trust the man. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon herself. Ma'am, fabulous that we're working in this direction.
Absolutely. President promised, and we're going to deliver on that promise. It's interesting you said it took a year. I think it's been lightning speed to accomplish what we've been accomplishing over the past year. Signing these interagency agreements and moving programs into different agencies, for this co-administration of these particular programs is really going well. Well, it is moving, at the right speed. We have given it a lot of thought. We plan for it very carefully. We work with the heads of those agencies, and these interagency agreements that we sign are very carefully thought out. So I do believe that we are moving in the right direction, and I'm very pleased with what we've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, well, ma'am, I think that respectfully, we know each other through Connecticut politics, and you obviously ran WWE, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. Cannot think of anybody else to cut costs there other than you. What do you think your estimated cuts will be for the next fiscal budget coming around in October? Do you think it's going to be a drastic reduction now that things are getting parsed out?
Well, no, not at that point, because what we're looking at, really, some of the bureaucracy will be gone, but really what we're really looking at is what the programs are and is our recommendations, to Congress for what we should have in, the Title I funding and IDEA funding and the different programs that are done out of the Department of Education, rather than focusing so much on reductions, in the overhead and the bureaucracy. There will be some of that. There'll be other announcements that'll be made, and we'll be able to start to see some of these savings soon. But our concern right now is to make sure that the funding that is going to these programs continues to flow the way that it should, and there'll be no interruptions in that. And these programs that we've already moved, well, they're seamless, and that's the goal at this particular point.
One of the big things, you posted actually this graphic showing the numbers of American students behind or in the loan debt crisis. We have 43 million borrowers, $1.7 trillion in federal student loan. And there's all this talk always about, fixing student loans and all these things. But I got to ask, how come nobody has ever pressured the schools, be like, you're charging too damn much for this education that's landing kids as baristas anyway?
Well, I think when you look at the Working Families Tax Cut bill, and you see that there are caps now on graduate programs and amounts that can be borrowed from many different professions, it is kind of the first step, if you will, of creating downward pressure from universities to reduce those costs.
Well, you're the first one to ever do it.
Well, hey, that's the charge. We stepped up to the plate because it's the right thing to do. It's common sense thing to do. And in order to start bringing down the cost of education. You have to put some caps on these things and change the rules. And that's exactly how we've been focused in doing what we're doing.
Maybe not 300,000 for gender studies or something. Real quick, you and the DOJ have announced Friday that you're going to be suing Harvard over anti-Semitism and a lot of these Gaza encampments and the little Hamas people running around protesting. How's this going, and what's the end result here?
Well, that's a DOJ lawsuit, and they are actually, so they are suing Harvard and have opened this lawsuit relative to anti-Semitism, which was clearly blatant. I mean, we saw it, covered by the media, for over many, many months. So what's happening now with the Department of Education, we are also we're opening a couple of investigations based on complaints, that were actually brought to our attention. And so we're opening investigations on those as well for anti-Semitism relative to applications, because Students v. Harvard, that is actually a case that the courts found that Harvard was guilty of, and so now we're going in, we're checking to make sure that they are doing what they said they were doing. They haven't been very forthcoming with their information, so now we've opened an investigation on 2 separate complaints that were filed with us.
Yeah. Well, Secretary of Education Linda McMahon, we appreciate it very much, ma'am.
He loves the Constitution. He fights for what's right. He hates the bad guys. He's a freedom warrior. He's your freedom warrior. Watch Carl Higbie every weekday on Newsmax.